कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
Welcome to Kitaabnama. I'm delighted to be here this evening and even more pleased to welcome my friend Pramod KG, who is a well-known name in the world of visual arts. Not only is he an expert on photography, but he also runs a very interesting production house which deals with archiving. He was also the first director of the Jaipur Literature Festival and is presently co-director of this beautiful festival called Mountain Echoes, which happens in Bhutan every year. But today we are here really to discuss his singular book, which is called The Long Exposure, The Camera in Udaipur, 1857 to 1957. The book is a beautiful, interesting document which has been produced by the Maharana Mewar Charitable Foundation, and I was particularly entranced by the title of the book. So I think I would like to begin by asking Pramod, why The Long Exposure?
Well, The Long Exposure, Alka, was fairly easy for us to work on because in the earlier days of photography, when photography had just been invented and it was being practiced in India, the camera had to do a long exposure to capture an image. And for us, because we were showcasing 100 years of the Mewar archives, photography archives particularly, it made pertinent sense to be able to call it the long exposure, and that was actually the simple reason why we wanted to do it. And it was also the name of the opening exhibition at Udaipur, Long Exposure. So exposure of the camera, exposure of the archive for the people who were going to come and see the collection. So that was the main fundamental reason behind picking up on this name.
Now you're talking of the archive. Let me go with that word because you also run ECA, which is the archiving outfit that you have been doing a lot of work with. But was this the first archiving that you started with, and is it only photography? And while looking at photography in Udaipur, what was it which was at the back of your mind when you started this very important collection which I've seen from the book?
This was one of my first photography archive as an independent company. I had worked on the Alkazi collection earlier. I had worked on setting up other museums connected to archives of a different nature with textiles, with costumes and other things. But for photography, independently, yes, this City Palace Museum, Udaipur's collection of photographs was one of the first that we started. We've completed 5 years of being a company now, and this book is actually a result of that work. And so yeah, when we started, we really didn't have a total clue as to what this book would eventually emerge into, but we realized that we were trying to document a nascent archive which was maintained systematically over 150 years within the City Palace complex at Udaipur. And the photographs had been safely stored and kept, but in the contemporary age, when we needed to make a gallery, when we needed to make sense of the archive and to understand it, to open it up for researchers and scholars to come and look into it, we realized that if we did not archive the entire collection, if it was not readily accessible to people who came, then it would become very difficult for us to manage, look after and benefit and gain from the archive. So that was really primarily something. The path was clear because the clients, the City Palace Museum itself was very clear that they wanted it to be an research avenue which would allow for further study into the visual culture of the region. And Udaipur, being a very significant court, had documented itself systematically through painting over the years. But in 1840s, when the camera came to India and we had the first photography studio starting up by foreigners, by Indians, the emphasis of documenting ceremonies, functions, rites of passage moved from painting to photography. And to our surprise, to our pleasant surprise, we realized that the archive was very rich in showing all kinds of photography. The genesis of photography in India runs parallel with the genesis of photography across the world, and we were able to show it to a great extent by looking at the collection itself. So yeah, the archive was something that grew organically based on the collection, the scale of the collection, the volume, the kind of technical aspects of the collection, and eventually we were able to open a gallery within the City Palace Museum in Udaipur to showcase the gallery to collection, and the overview actually became this book eventually.
So did it take 5 years for you to do the book? And did you have a very, very specific mission or SOP, as they say, a statement of purpose by Arvind Singh Mewar? Did he tell you that this is how you have to do it? Or did you have enough freedom to use your perception, because you've got a background in colonial photography? You were associated with the Alkazi archives, which is one of the finest archives of colonial photography. So with that rich experience that you went into this collection, how did you organize the collection?
The client was very clear. Arvind Singh Mewar was very clear that he wanted the archive opened up. He wanted more people to be able to access it, and for Udaipur itself to understand what its visual culture, the history of its visual culture meant. And in that sense, he just wanted the job done. He didn't have any particular notion of what we should or we should not do.
So did you kind of go through all the pictures, the glass plates, look at everything? Was it the quality of the picture which was more significant, or was it the quality of preservation which drove your collection and curation?
I mean, I would say honestly it's a bit of both. The fact that these boxes of photographs were kept in the storerooms which adjoined the lakeside facade of the City Palace complex meant that these rooms had a lot of fresh air coming in constantly. So they kind of created a micro chamber which allowed for a constant temperature over 100-150 years, and that made the photographic archive fairly secure.
Oh, that's
so we were very lucky in that sense to have the archives in that manner. And secondly, our conservator was constantly getting excited about the different types of photographic material that was coming up. So from him we learnt that we had very early albumin processes, we had gelatin plates, we had glass plate negatives of several different kinds, several formats of early photography, from the ubiquitous Kattevisit onwards to all the other every 10 years a new kind of photography was to develop, and soon enough it used to reach Udaipur. So the archive is a great record of the history and change of the photographic technology within the country, in the subcontinent to a large extent. So that helped us keep track of what was a slowly growing, mounting excitement. Became quite evident that there was a large story to tell when we finished the process. And so the opening exhibition, which is actually what this book is eventually showcasing, was a history and an overview of the entire collection. So in the exhibition we had about 128 odd images. So the book has all of those images plus a few extra ones from the archives to explain pertinent points. You must also remember, as you probably are aware, that the history of Mewar, all the visual material had copious notes at the back of every image. Similarly in paintings, so was the case in photography. So part of the documenting process also meant that we had to transcribe and translate what was written behind every photograph, and that gave us other kinds of information about who the person was who was photographed, what was the occasion in some cases, what was the price paid for buying the photograph, if multiple copies were made, how many copies were made. In fact, in many cases we do have multiple copies. When the exhibitions were going on or when traveling shows were going on, we were spoiled for choice, because even 6 you could pick the best one and literally, or hold back the best and take as the second or the third for an exhibition. So those kinds of advantages were there with the archive, and we translated that story. In fact, in the book we've made it a point to explain all of this so that people realize that when you work in an archive, it's sometimes considered a dull, no joy job, but it's actually completely the other way around. If you're interested in it, the archive can constantly enthrall you, keep you enthralled on a daily basis, and getting up at 9 and being there at work was probably a great high for the entire team.
You've been working with other photo collections as well. So do you think the Udaipur archives are particularly singular in their content. By way of materials, you've said they have a huge variety of materials on which the photographs were done, and the fact that they almost had a little history, a little memoir at the back of it. Have you seen it in other collections as well, or is this very, very particular to Udaipur?
We've not seen it too much in many other collections, except for say Al-Qazi collection, because he collected photographs much later. It was not something he inherited. In other collections, the premium over the years was not necessarily on photography, so perhaps they were not well kept. Many of the images may have left archives. If large families were to split up with diverse and disparate heirs, then the collection would move with them. Udaipur was very fortunate that the entire archive was kept together in one place. So the scale and volume and quality and quantity of images is particular to this place, and thus it gives us an entire overview on what happened in photography in the subcontinent, in the region, within a span of 150 years in one particular court. So that is remarkable in itself. Other examples in other parts of the country exist, but not of this scale. They don't go up to these many numbers. They may vary from 5,000 to 10,000 to 12,000 at most, but Udaipur is singular in its vast scale, and the fact that majority of the images were kept within the archive and they were maintained in one place.
So, do you think, Pramod, that this archive can be a huge resource for students of photography, for students or photo historians, or people who are actually looking at what a photograph means?
Especially now when we are so used to taking digital photography, most people who have not worked in early forms of photography don't realize what a print photograph means. So for them to come look at this archive, to study, to understand the nuances of why photographs were shot in a certain way, why they were posed in a certain way, what kind of events were being captured, who were the early photographers, what kind of use were these photographs being put to. All of this is something which is very important for understanding the history of photography in India and across the world, and this archive allows you to greatly explore all of these themes in multiple forms. So I definitely do think that this is a great center and a resource for photo historians and all kinds of historians. Increasingly it's happening that it's not just the photo historian who's coming to look at it. Sometimes images are made use of to create or explain a point, to explain a certain juncture of history which can be best illustrated by a picture instead of putting it down in prose. So that is something that photography does very well too. It's not the primary purpose, but it does happen that way too. So we have a lot of general historians also wanting to come and look at these archives, and photo historians of course come a great deal. They come look at the material, and they're able to glean newer information on the history and culture of visual practices in the country.
Is there a particular photograph or a set of photographs or a particular genre of photographs which are your favorites here?
Well, actually in Udaipur we are spoiled for choice. There are so many which are quite remarkable, but there is a couple of painted photographs in the archive which are quite spectacular, because this brings together twin favorites of the court. Painting and photography both come together, and in these images beautiful photographs were taken and then they were painted over by court photographers or by other members of the extended artist families who were associated with the court. And in some cases we've also found that if an artist had two children, one went into photography and one went into painting. If one brother photographed the image, took the image, the other brother would invariably end up painting over it. So it was an extraordinary amalgam of two distinct styles coming together. So the series of painted photography in Udaipur would probably be a great favorite of mine. And unlike in other archives, it's not just one or two images which were painted over. A large number of images were painted over, and they give us multiple stories. And it's not that every surface was painted. The artist clearly knew when to stop, what to highlight, what not to highlight, what to change, what to adapt. And so when you look at the black and white unpainted version and then you look at the painted version, you glean a lot of information. So the painted photographs, I would say, are my clear favorites in the collection.
So Pramod, do you think that the painted photographs are collaborative processes? And that's one question. And the second is that how much of the Mewar style of painting, because you've been there and you're talking about the rich archive in painting, so how much of the stylistic impressions of the Mewar school of painting is carried on when the painter is painting over the photographs?
Yes, the stylistic stylistic nature of Mewar paintings does continue to show in the photographs too. If the Maharana was portrayed with a halo or a nimbus behind his face, then that continued in the photograph too. They added a nimbus onto the photograph. The color combinations often used in the miniature paintings were to continue on photographic material too. The way the borders were painted was very distinct in Mewar, and some of that continues to showcase on the photographs too. And in some exceptional cases, we also have textual information inscribed onto the front of the photograph, not on the back but on the front, which explains or gives a point of when the image was taken to commemorate what occasion. So that is something that is a legacy of the painting tradition of the region. So yeah, for sure, the painting tradition continues to show itself in the image making that happens once the photograph is being painted over.
So do you think the painter and was a kind of a collaborator with the photographer?
You know,
or there were two different genres which kind of blended well together?
They definitely blended well together. It's too early for us to say whether they really collaborated because we don't have any empirical evidence of any kind. What we do know that sometimes it was members of the same family who worked together, and we also do know that if a photograph was taken and if the artist decided he or she wanted to highlight a certain aspect, then they would tend to do that, because a bit of exaggeration does come into painting, whereas at the same time you have examples where it's an exact reproduction of the photograph itself in a certain way, just with color onto it. So there may have been collaboration, but we are not very sure about it at this point. I think we need to do far more research and find out more local material to be able to convincingly close the argument.
So it's been very interesting talking to you, Pramod, and also to see that how much a photograph can reveal, how much it can become a source, a historian's tool, an anthropologist's tool, how much it becomes a kind of an important and integral part of a retelling of history. So from these photographs, actually, you can, can the present custodian of Mewar take a leaf out of it and learn something for the future, you think?
Absolutely, and I think they continue to do it because these archives are maintained, looked into, consulted, reproduced constantly at the Palace Museum itself. For all the events, images are used for future publications, they are used for publicity, they are used. So they really understand the value of these images, and the new shows and books that are coming out from the archive are, I think, clear indication that the archives are going to stay for some time too, and for future generations to be able to learn, appreciate and understand what this image making process meant.
So that's great news for the world of photography, and I think perhaps this is the first book which has come out on a private collection in the way after post-independent India, other than the monographs which have been brought out by the Alkazi Foundation.
Quite a lot of books have come out, but largely there have been exhibition catalogues on pioneering photography exhibitions which have happened in India and across the world on Indian photography. But yes, this is probably one of the first to explain the process of how a photography archive got created, maintained, digitized and now open for research. And as a tool for understanding the medium, I think this is a great way to start.
So thank you very much. And Kitaabnama's particular episode on the long exposure, the camera at Udaipur, will, I think, open very many new avenues to young photo historians, to people who are documenting history, and for those who just love the photograph. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alka, for having us, and thank you very much for Kitaabnama for asking me to come and speak on our book.
Today we have with us Farah Ghaznavi, a versatile writer who is also a newspaper columnist and a social worker. We are here to talk today about Farah's book Fragments of River Song, which she's edited. It's a collection of short stories. Farah's works have been well acclaimed and in all parts of the world, in UK, US, Canada, France, Germany, Nepal, India, and of course in Bangladesh, which is her native land. Farah, talking about this book, which is a collection of stories, tell us what was the criteria of selecting these books? Was there an underlying theme or any other criteria set by you yourself or your publisher while selecting these stories?
Well, my publisher essentially gave me a free hand. So which stories went into this book was entirely up to me. And my selection, I've written several stories which don't appear in this book, but the stories that appear here are essentially selected because I wanted to show a range of styles and stories and content in this particular selection. So for example, you know, there are a lot of ideas about Bangladesh in the wider world which are not really accurate, or particularly about contemporary Bangladesh, you know.
Yeah.
So people are stuck in stereotypes about poverty or misery or violence or whatever. And while poverty or violence are part of, you know, life, everyday life in this part of the world, in all of our countries, there is also a lot more that we never hear about. The development initiatives that are working, or the, you know, the changes in society that are positive. So for example, Bangladesh today has very, very good gender indicators. Ironically, actually better than India's, Amartya Sen commented. And I wanted to write some stories and to use some stories that would show that range of diversity. So there are characters who are men and women, boys and girls. There are characters who come from different strata of society, you know, upper middle class, very poor street children. There are characters who are, you know, at also different stages of the life cycle. So you have teenagers and you have children, and then you have adults and you have elderly people. And I guess what I wanted to show was a well-rounded selection of stories. Some are funny, some are sad, some are a little bit dark, you know. So those were the criteria that I essentially used.
When we talk about stories, I mean, there are so many different stories, but there are also similarities between stories that we have. So did the audiences outside your own place, outside Bangladesh, identify with these stories? How was the response?
You know, that's very interesting. I feel that the stories that I write are essentially grounded in Bangladesh, in the sense that a lot of them are set in Bangladesh, or they are about Bangladeshi characters overseas. But I also feel that for much of my writing, there is a kind of universal thread that goes through it. I'm very interested in human relationships. You know, I don't just mean romantic relationships, but also with our families, with our own childhoods, what makes us who we are today. And I think those aspects, you know, the one story in there is called Getting There, and it was chosen to be on an international literature course alongside the likes of Jhumpa Lahiri. So I was shocked and delighted at the State University of New York. And what was very interesting to me was that the professor at the end of the semester told the students, you pick one story out of all the ones you've studied, one character, and you discuss why. And then she sent me about 7 or 8 students had actually picked this my little story from Bangladesh. And it was interesting to me because what they said was, not only did they enter a different culture when they read this story, but that the character there who is running away from a bad childhood and then has to go back to her family and discovers that things are not quite the way that she thought they were with her sister and her parents, that somehow spoke in a universal way to these young people, you know, that they felt, a lot of them said, oh, this reminds me of my relationship with my father. You know, so a young American sitting in New York talking about a story in Bangladesh that reminds them about their relationship with their father. So I would hope that there are certain universal themes that readers will pick up on and feel a connection to.
Talking about the relations, there is this one story, Waiting for the Storm, which is about a woman caught up in an unhappy marriage. And
Yes.
Would you like to you know, read it to our audiences?
I would love to. Thank you. It's happening again. A familiar rage unfolds its sticky wings within the captive interior of my chest, a monstrous butterfly emerging gracelessly from its cocoon. It's the same every night. The taste of panic blooms bitter on my tongue. Swallowing hard, I wonder how much longer I can bear this charade. Spooning your food onto that ridiculous brass platter that you insist on using, you proceed to eat it in the familiar, methodical, maddening sequence that supposedly provides optimal nutrition. You are obsessed with your health. Now in your 50s, you want to live forever. Ayurveda has provided the answer as far as you're concerned. Returning to the ways of our ancestors, you call it. The frugality of the system suits you, an approach both pure and puritanical. Thanks to you, I've spent years learning about the medicinal benefits of plants, but time gathering knowledge is never wasted. My attention returns unexpectedly to the present as you actually tell me that something tastes good, but it's too late, too little. I'm tired of it all now, your endless complaints, your chronic self-absorption. My impatience to get away begins to spiral out of control. Your words are gradually crowded out by the storm taking over my brain. Unaware of my traitorous thoughts, your lips continue to move. They flap in the quickening breeze, while that insidious inner voice of mine mocks every move that you make. Your preoccupation with your irregular bowels, your mother's opinion on everything, your brother's financial success that you profess to admire yet resent so deeply. When I married you, I was the awkward daughter in my accomplished family, not academically inclined despite my professorial parentage, nor light-skinned and graceful as we are bludgeoned into believing that a Desi woman should be. More than 2 decades older, turmeric-stained by the remnants of a failed marriage, you were nevertheless deemed a catch for a girl like me. In the beginning, I was too inexperienced to know what to expect. I had merely hoped to escape the smothering weight of parental expectations, to begin living a life of my own, however ordinary. Whatever references I had were drawn from the starry-eyed heroines of the Mills and Boon romances that I was so addicted to. But 10 dreary years, the despair of continuous boredom and 3 miscarriages later, I have come to realize that this is no Cinderella story. You are hardly a savior, not even much of a man, really. I wish I could have just left you, but my parents would never have provided shelter to such a disgraceful daughter. No, initiating the departure from my marriage would have been excruciating, involving a series of postmortems and recriminations, warnings and wishful thinking about second chances. So I found another way. You will be the one to leave. Datura and aconite are well-known herbal toxins, but there are many other more obscure witches' weeds tucked away in the depths of the manuals, awaiting discovery by a discerning scholar. In the end, I found the perfect one. In tiny doses, mitrachorum is undetectable and highly effective. To assuage my fraying patience, all I have to do is dwell on the years of freedom that lie ahead. I am no longer bothered by pangs of conscience, and the benefits of being a too young bride are now becoming evident to me. They are further enhanced by your miserly habits, which have guaranteed me a solvent future as your grieving widow. And when the time comes, I will finally be free of those who have for so long controlled my life in the name of respectability. The storm will break soon, but I am ready, waiting in my bunker, yearning for its arrival.
Oh, wonderful, beautiful.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful story, and when you narrate it yourself, it becomes even more sweeter. Thank you very much for being with us. We're delighted to have you. Thank you very much.